Hi, folks. This is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency. I'm getting pretty excited about next month's release, the November 23 release of the fifth National Climate Assessment, which is supposed to come with a big change atlas so that I'll be able to get you really detailed information on your state by state climate resilience recommendations. But as I get ready for that, I thought it would probably be a good idea if I reviewed some of our national overview information from the fourth National Climate Assessment so that it's fresh in my mind and I can really identify changes more quickly from the fourth to the fifth edition. So let's get going. I want to talk with you a little bit about our national outlook in a global context and then digging in on the national level to what sort of changes we expect for different regions and how we expect populations in the US to move by 2050. So, looking at a global figure, you've probably heard me talk many times about the fact that I anticipate we're moving towards a 2-degree future. That is based on high consensus science as shared in the IPCC's AR6 report, which came out in the spring of this year, spring of 2023. If you check out the long form video on my channel for the AR6 long form report, you'll be able to see the probability tables that highly suggest hitting around 2 is our most likely future. Many of us who are climate aware remember that the Paris Accords were supposed to help us keep warming below 1.5 C. You still hear talk about how that is possible in the media. When you look at consensus science, it's really not. 2 is our most likely and in many ways best possible future. So this figure is about the risk of species loss, the percentage of animal species and seagrasses exposed to potentially dangerous temperature conditions. You can see at 2 degrees C, there's a lot of color on the map. So let's take a second to check out the key. We can see that the white at 0% up to this mustardy yellow at 10% here is a 0 to 10% risk of species loss. And then when you move into the purple, you're looking at a much higher percentages. You're looking at 60, 80, 100% species loss. So in a 2-degree future, at our most likely future, we can see that there is a relatively small percentage of risk of species loss present in North America compared to many other parts of the world. You see high risk of species loss all around the Mediterranean, very high risk of species loss throughout this beautiful, biodiverse, culturally rich part of Southeast Asia. And we see that South America looks to be impacted more severely than North America. Let's dig in a little bit to what that means in terms of water and temperature trends. Looking at global trends related to annual hottest day temperature changes, we can see that hotspots again are anticipated to be pretty serious in South America, all around the Mediterranean, and in South Africa, which is already so water stressed. We do see some changes anticipated in North America, but I'm a little less concerned about changes in your annual hottest degree day in areas where the hottest degree day is not that high, as opposed to around the Mediterranean, where it can already get, particularly in North Africa and the Middle East, quite high, the annual hottest day temperature. Looking at the annual mean total soil moisture column change, that's talking about the soil getting really dry. That's talking about the sort of impact long-term drought has on soil. We can see that there are some impacts anticipated for North America, but these are mostly in areas that are already desert. This significant impact here, this isn't an area that is already a desert. Whereas when we look at the impacts around the Mediterranean, they're very serious, very dark brown, right? That combined with the high heat, combined with the risk of temperature related species loss, we see this is a very challenging outlook for this part of the world that is going to drive a lot of human migration. Unfortunately, we see other drought hotspots emerging in the breadbaskets of Asia, in very serious agricultural producers in South America. So this is a dangerous picture globally. And while we are facing challenges in the US, I feel like it's very important for us to understand our position in this global context. Let's start looking at the information for the US. Let's get down into it, see what kind of potential we can really bring out from this relatively good global outlook. So as we start putting together the pieces for the outlook in the continental US, the first piece of information we're going to pull together is from the USDA based on projected days over 86 degrees. So when we were talking about the 2-degree future, that was in C. We're going over to America degrees. This 86 degrees, we're talking about degrees F. So let's look at what the key says here. If it's blue, you got a pretty cool summer, less than a month, traditionally over 86 degrees. And we can see that based on this historic data from the 80s to 2009, a lot of the country had pretty cool summers. As we look towards 2050, we see a major retreat of the blue. I know a lot of people are interested in our Sky Islands type emerging bioregion in northern New Mexico and Colorado. You might want to check out the great conservation there. But for those of us who are interested in overview information, here's what I want you to focus on is this peach colored band where we see the transition between 61 to 90 days over 86, 90 to 120 days over 86. We're seeing that in contemporary data between Arkansas and Missouri, we're seeing it between Tennessee and Kentucky, we're seeing it in southern Illinois. We know that these are very valuable agricultural producing areas. We know that this is a tolerable climate band. Let's see where it's moving. It's moving really far north. We're getting it up into northern Illinois, into Iowa, all the way up into the Dakotas, into South Dakota here. This is a real tracer for where we're going to have agricultural movement. As we look at this area here, which I've highlighted as an excellent zone for growing things, the growing stuff zone in 2050, we're looking at a potential for expanded agricultural seasons, expanded growing seasons. And in some parts of this area, particularly here west of the Great Lakes, we have some of the best cold preservation in the summer, good cool weather preservation in the summer, making this desirable area for many people to move to, for many people to live. Looking at this sort of peach colors, these peachy bands, we notice that around the Palouse in the Pacific Northwest, centered here in Washington, we see some expansion of that there. If we can manage to get control of the water, good control of the groundwater, this is also an area where there will be a potential extension of the growing season. Looking at our third sort of destination area over in the Northeast, we can see traditionally very cool summers, some areas with intense change, but not intense change into like red territory, into like a deep south feeling territory. We're talking about areas that will still have a climate that is really pretty pleasant for most people, including people who live in the region today. Decent preservation, locally, big potential changes in the growing season. I mean, look at Buffalo. That's a big color change there around Buffalo. When we're talking about other parts of the United States, let's focus on the South, the Southwest and the Southeast. We see some new colors appearing on the map in terms of summer intensity in the Southwest. Look at Los Angeles. If you check out the California video, you can see the extent to which the Los Angeles area is an epicenter for summer heat expansion, and it is on the red list for federal concern over mass casualty events because of the heat. Los Angeles is one of the cities where we're going to need to do major infrastructure upgrades to be able to keep people cool enough in the climate that is going to come. So we're looking at a lot of increased heat in Southern California and in Arizona. And you'll notice the colors have also changed down here in the South. And we've got some like pretty serious hot spots emerging down in Southern Florida, right? More than 210 degrees projected over 86 every year. So this sort of heat we're seeing, sort of a central Florida heat, is going to be blooming all the way up into Georgia, all the way across Texas. This is heat that many people are not going to find pleasant, but at the same time, we know there are a lot of people who choose to live in Central Florida. So there are many people who can tolerate this heat. I would like you to keep an eye on Georgia here as we see some more pieces of this puzzle layered together, because many of us already know heat is going to feel differently in Arizona than it might in Georgia, right? So we need some more information. Let's talk about the winters, and then we'll talk about changes to precipitation. All right, looking at winter lows through the lens of plant hardiness zones, we can see that this historic data from 1980 to 2009 to the 2050 projection, you may notice that this is less different than the summer heat, and we do expect more winter stability in the US than summer stability. Areas where you see relatively little change in plant hardiness zone, that means that you've got a good shot for your mature plants, you've got a good shot for forest stability. I would like to point out where we see a lot of change here, and that is east of the Great Lakes is probably our highest change area, east of the Great Lakes. Many people think of the UP as a potential climate destination because they think of it as so cold and snowy, really great place for winter sports. I feel like it's worth pointing out the UP is one of the higher change spots in the projections. The UP is going to get a very mild, in some places almost a Virginia-like winter. And we see big change in the winter throughout Michigan. Look at that light green coming up around Detroit. That light green, we see that in Southern Virginia today. Big changes to landscapes and ecosystems projected. The change slows down once you get into upstate New York, where we have relatively good winter preservation in upstate New York, in northern Vermont and New Hampshire, and in Maine away from the coast. This is a great preservation area. If you're interested in a low change area, this part of northern New England is really great. I talked about the relatively good cool summer preservation west of the Great Lakes. Please note that there's also decent winter cold preservation there. Pretty good news in terms of the forests. We can hope for forest health, particularly in Wisconsin, where we see some of the best cold preservation on that side of the lakes. We talked about the potential for expanded growing season in the Pacific Northwest. Please note there's almost no change projected in that expanding area of cultivation around the Palouse, meaning that people who are putting in vines and trees now have some pretty good reason to think that those vines and trees, if you can keep them wet enough, if they can get enough water, are likely to continue to be able to bear well moving into the future. As we look to the southwest and the southeast, we do see some changes with higher levels of change in terms of winter lows projected for the southeast. So check this out. I know it's kind of hard to distinguish. I want you to try and distinguish between this olive color and this mustard color. We see a big expansion of that sort of mustardy yellow color all around the Gulf. That's a sort of a subtropical feeling. And if you'll notice, peeking over at central Florida here, that's the kind of winter temperature you need for successful citrus cultivation. Very valuable crop. Please notice, moving up into Georgia, we have expansion of that zone 9 area, that citrus cultivating area. So if you're feeling brave, you feel like putting some in and getting them established, might be worth it. A hardier citrus like tangerine could have a good future there. But as I've been saying, all of the potential depends on water. Life depends on water. So looking at the projected precipitation trends, we can see evidence of a national landscape that is going to transform, and some places where we really do have the potential to realize a lot of hope. I want to talk about the Southwest first because this is very challenging. Remember, I said that Southern California and Arizona, we're looking at a rough outlook in terms of temperatures. We're also looking at a very rough outlook in terms of precipitation trends. If we look at Arizona here, we can see that they're projected to have a serious decrease in spring precipitation, which is when they get their rain, right? Like they get seasonal rains there, spring and fall. And it doesn't look good in terms of if the fall is going to come in and there's sporadic summer precipitation, also looking very negative. It looks like it's going to be much hotter and much drier in that southwestern desert. Although we see some moderation of that drying trend as we get up into that precious territory in Colorado and northern New Mexico. They are likely to get more winter precipitation. They're likely to come closer to a wash on spring precipitation. Very hopeful sign. The summer precipitation nationwide is going to be a big problem. The sort of droughts we've seen the last couple of years that have led the Mississippi River to be impassable to barge traffic at exactly the time when those of us in the Midwest tend to ship corn and soy down the river, it looks like that is going to be a likely continuing trend. We are going to see widespread summer precipitation loss across the majority of the country. Unfortunately, this will be intense all the way up into Oregon. With California, you don't worry about it so much because they don't get a lot of summer precipitation. If you lose 80% of your $5, it's sad. If you lose 80% of your $5,000, that's like way sadder, right? Oregon, though, Oregon needs that summer precipitation. And this is a big part of why Washington has a much stronger outlook than Oregon does, is that drop right there. But looking at the Midwest again, this particularly valuable agricultural area, we see hope in the projections in that they are likely to get statistically significant amounts of increased precipitation in both the winter and the spring over some easily rechargeable aquifer systems. So we're looking at an overall trend in that area where, with a reasonable climate resilient approach to hydrology, where we engage in responsible irrigation with monitoring of the groundwater, like South Dakota is doing today, we have a good chance of maintaining agricultural production in that area. Over in the Northeast, particularly, let's highlight that conservation area there. We see a wet trend where, like Vermont has dealt with this year, we're going to need to build resilience against flooding to realize potential in that area. A little bit of an eye on Georgia again, as one of the most potentially resilient states in the Southeast. That is a nice precipitation outlook, a little bit wetter to balance those higher temperatures, but not anything as overwhelming as the floods that we're definitely looking at increasing up in the Northeast. I do want to highlight another state of most concern related not just to those changes in summer temperatures, changes in winter lows, but changes in precipitation. We need to take a look at Louisiana here. This year, many people are unaware that Louisiana has faced terrible droughts. And when we envision Louisiana, I think we often think of this lush, wet, tropical landscape. The bayou has gone dry, folks. There are terrible wildfires in Louisiana. And I wish this wasn't the case. But if you look, they're likely to see more of these summer droughts, and they're also likely to lose precipitation year round. So when we think about the landscape transformation there, we really can't think of it as a tropical transformation in that sort of classical public imagination sense, right? Not a lush, wet landscape. We're talking about a landscape more like the Caribbean today, a water limited landscape. So this has helped us to put a lot of pieces together as we visualize a national change landscape in terms of how agriculture is likely to change and where people might want to move. Let's talk about that in sort of this overview of overviews slide in terms of things that people most care about, which is what's going to happen to my house, right? What's going to happen to my house? What's going to happen to my community? What's going to happen to my family? If we look at this overview map, you can see that most of the markers that I put on there are yellow to blue. And let's talk about what those mean as well as what these orange ones mean. Orange doesn't mean that everyone needs to run away screaming, but it does mean that some people are going to need to move. Let's start by talking about the Western Gulf here. This area is going to be particularly impacted by sea level rise. In Texas, the insurance company by mid-century are projecting a $30 billion with a B dollars minimum direct property loss from sea level rise. That's a problem. That's going to be bad. I would get out of there before the housing values collapse. Same thing on the Gulf Coast of Florida. You're looking at changing, challenging temperature conditions and precipitation conditions and sea level rise. If you love it there, you should stick around. There's no reason for everyone to run away screaming. But if you're trying to be there for like another 60 years, you got to know how serious the challenges are that you're up against, right? Looking up at a really unfortunate patch of our orange hexagons here, densely populated portion of the East Coast, right? When I have these on here, it's not because of overall hellacious conditions. It's because people who live near the coast in this area are going to be disproportionately impacted by sea level rise. This whole part of the coast here that kind of sticks out on the shallow continental shelf is looking at higher rates of sea level rise than some other parts of the country. Down here in the sort of lower southeast coast, this area, the sea level rise challenge is serious, but we're likely to be able to put resilience measures in place that'll help more people stay in their homes. Massachusetts, Long Island, Chesapeake Bay, all of those areas are looking at a lot of direct property loss from sea level rise. You should check out if your home and community is likely to be impacted and make your decisions now, because I don't think there's going to be a big federal buyout. Looking at other areas where people might want to get out if they aren't super invested in the area, that long-term drying trend in Arizona and California is likely to have major impacts on industries there. A lot of food is grown there now. It's going to be a real problem. It's going to be a real agricultural shift. if we lose the winter produce from Arizona and Southern California. It is worth noting that Northern California, particularly by the coast, has a much more potentially resilient outlook than other parts of the state. We know that California has like 970 biomes, so it shouldn't be shocking that some of its bioregions are going to be more stable than others. California and the rest of the Southwest, though, you really will need to put resilience measures in place against increasing heat and increasing water stress. And speaking of water stress, that is what makes most of these light blue hexagons different from the dark blue hexagons. If you're looking at a light blue area, people should definitely hang out there. You could take in a few more people, but they're areas with potential water stress. You don't want those to be new population centers. However, there are areas with pretty good groundwater resources, particularly here, particularly in the northern Midwest, where a lot more people could live as we envision a United States that has a strong climate resilient future. This is an area where we should be making a ton of infrastructure investment because although, of course, there's going to be change, there will be more flooding, there will be more extreme storms. These are challenges that we can overcome. And these are places where we can make homes for the people in the US who are going to leave more dangerous areas, need a place to go. And thinking back about that global information, there are going to be billions of people who are impacted more harshly than any of us are likely to be impacted in the US. So thinking about where we can take in some of this enormous amount of displaced persons, I think the northern Midwest is our most likely place. If we look at these areas, if we look at the Northeast, I'm willing to bet that most of the people on the coast who are displaced are going to stay in region. I think we're going to fill those up. There's no place where we don't need to build climate resilience. In areas like this, in southern Ohio and Indiana, there are going to be more dangerous heat events. We're going to need to have individual and community infrastructure for cooling. Looking across the prairies here, it's going to be really important to prioritize the water in this region for agriculture. If you remember that global outlook, we know that a lot of world breadbaskets are going to be impacted much more severely than this big staple crop producing area in the United States. It's going to be really important to keep agriculture up, not only for domestic use, but for export. America is the biggest agricultural exporter in the world. You can see from the global outlook that there will be more demand than ever. Hopefully, by building resilience, we'll have enough to give. Thanks for hanging out with me, folks, as we review this data. I have to say, as we move towards next month when we're going to get these new maps, the thing that I am most like chomping at the bit about is to get the updated precipitation information. Since 2018, there have been huge advances in our ability to model cloud cover and accordingly to model long-term precipitation outlooks. Once we get that, it'll really help us to set the boundaries of areas that could take in more people and let us understand how much populations would need to drop in some of our more water stressed areas to allow for a sustainable future. I think precipitation is going to be the biggest change if we get good maps to most state outlooks. When we look at the updated state outlooks coming out in December and January, once I've had time to review the data. Overall, though, I hope this helps you see that the destination regions here in the US, the inland Pacific Northwest, the northern Midwest, and northern New England, they really have a very solid shot. There's a lot of hope for us to realize in this country. Our outlook nationally, we're looking a lot better than most places in the entire world. There are even a few places, like in the northern Midwest there, where we could potentially have increases in agricultural productivity. And you can tell, having had a fresh look at the big picture, how important that is going to be. So there is hope. We need to do our best to prepare for what's coming. Let's get ready. Next month, we'll have more data to help us do our very best. I want to thank everybody for your support of the channel and for your support of American Resiliency as a larger nonprofit organization. Since I released our last video, we've had a lot of volunteer outreach, particularly related to really churning out those updated state level forecasts once the 5th NCA comes out. If you volunteered to be part of that project, thank you again for your time in advance. We'll get that rolling next month. We still could use a few more people if we're going to have community chat space who are willing to serve as moderators of community space. If you're interested in doing that, please reach out to me. I know that it's a challenging job. I want to take a minute to thank everyone who is already part of our supporting team, whether you donate money, whether you donate time, whether you join as a supporting member of the channel. I really appreciate all of you. You're doing so much to help the information get out there so that we can prepare for our best possible future here in the United States. I also want to take a minute to advertise the AR Community Chat, which is coming up on Sunday, October 22nd from 2 to 3 p.m. We're going to be talking about housing and climate destinations as we look at real estate trends in some of the most promising areas of the country, justice issues, we might say, associated with those, and the importance of resilience in housing. I look forward to talking with you then. Let's get ready together. Bye.